Thank you. So I'm Representative Beth Quimby from Linden, and I serve on the House Education Committee, and I'm also a member of the School Redistricting Task Force.
Good morning. How's everyone doing? Pretty good? Good. My name is Rachel Burgin. I'm a former state representative from the great state of Florida. I worked on education policy there in the state throughout my time of being in office. And so we're going to kind of give you a broad overview about education policy this morning and then dig into Vermont specific. So I have been extremely engaged in education policy for the last 18 years from many ways, shape, and form. I'd worked on some of our educational choice policy in the state of Florida. For the state of Florida, as we are right this minute, Florida is a fully educational choice option state, meaning that if you want to homeschool, if you want to send your kids to private school, public school, whatever that looks like, you can actually do. This last year, though we worked on it for quite a while, is the first year that they passed a full education scholarship piece of legislation that allowed families to take that educational scholarship with them to whatever school that they chose. That's been in the work for a very, very long time, and many folks actually worked very hard to chip away at being able to make that happen. Just a little bit about my background is that I was a home educated student from K through 12th grade, and I went all the way through the system, and the first time I stood on a graduation stage, per se, was when I received my doctorate degree. So you can know that education is really the focus of whatever that parent and those students choose it to be. So in working on education policy, the organization I work for is Americans for Prosperity, and we have worked very diligently on education policy throughout the country. And there are lots of states throughout the country that allow parents to choose where their child attends school. But I will say, and Beth's going to talk about this a little bit more, is that Vermont has actually one of the oldest educational option legislations in the entire country. It's one of the oldest ones in the entire country, and that allows for some level of flexibility. Now, what that looks like is that parents may or may not be able to have a school for their child to go to. And it's really, really critically important that there is the legislative framework that allows the parents to have that option. Depending on where you are, it's really going to depend on whether or not your state has that legislative option to be able to do that. I had moved to Georgia and became a parent of a bouncing baby 14-year-old. And I realized, even though Georgia was a very much a educational option state, that the framework was not there for children to be able to choose the school that they wanted to go to, because there wasn't the option there. So public school was the option. And so there's a need for legislative reform to happen within a state to make it ability for parents to actually choose and students to have the opportunity to choose. So just kind of thinking through what education looks like in Vermont. Vermont spends some of the highest per dollar in the per capita of individual student in the entire country. I think it's second. It's fourth highest in the nation. It's $24,608. It's a very, very high dollar amount. If you take Florida into that, our total dollar per student is $11,000 per student that we spend to educate. So the need for educational options and reform for Vermont is really critical, and the legislature began working on that last year, which the representative's going to talk about. But what I would say is this, and that is that I was there in the Capitol during the first hearing where the governor's legislation was actually proposed, and I will just tell you that it was a very strong uphill battle because the folks on the other side that are definitely against such things fought very hard to strip out a lot of the good language that would have been in there, which the representative's going to dig into a little bit more. So What I would say is this, is that if Vermont is going to get to a place of reform and having educational options available to their students, whether it be public school, private school, homeschool, whatever level of education reform that is needed, the members of the delegation, Republican delegation, is going to need some support by members of the public to help make their voices heard, to make sure that those changes happen. And what I will say is this: when we first started this in the state of Florida, early on, about 2006, 2007, it was a very, very hostile situation. And people were very angry about the thought of opening up education options for students. And that included just a lot of misinformation. It was a lot of back and forth. But what did happen was that over time, when students had the ability to basically be flexible to attend the school of their choice, we began to have students themselves come to the Capitol to start talking to us about how that school choice option changed their life. And I will never forget one day a young man came to my office and he said, my goal, my dream is to become a merchant marine. And I am the only way, I've been stuck in a failing school. They're getting Fs year over year. And the only way that I've been able to actually make any progress is because the sacrifice of my mom to help me go to an independent school. And I really just want to be able to graduate and achieve my dream. And it was students like him and many others that began really making that impact and changing the hearts and minds of legislators to the point where you couldn't go home to your district anymore if you hadn't voted for options for students. So just to give you a couple of those ideas and broadly give you a perspective as to where Vermont is. Just in the Northeast region too, New Hampshire spends about $20,000 per student, and Maine spends about $18,000. So you are all in a pretty high level of per pupil spending, which means that it costs you as a taxpayer quite a significant amount of money to educate your student. So with that, I will pass it over to the representative to kind of dig into Vermont specific, and then we'll open it up for questions and kind of go back and forth.
Sure. So I'll talk a little Vermont-specific issues. So one thing about education policy in Vermont is that education is actually in the Vermont Constitution. It's the only government service that's in the Vermont Constitution. So a lot of the changes people would like to see are not possible due to constitutionality. We are required to provide substantially equal educational opportunities to all students, which is why we pay into a common fund. And then the money is redistributed. So we don't have gold towns and poor towns. So it kind of has really hit ahead based on our demographics. We've gone from about 120,000 students in Vermont down to 84,000, some places even less. When I started teaching, I had over 100 students that I taught, and when I retired, I had 50. The population declined by 50%, and it's going to be expensive in Vermont because of how rural we are. So the education reform, I said it really hit ahead with the homestead property tax increases, which would have been worse if we hadn't bought them down. But homestead property taxes only pay 25% of the education budget. It's a sliver. Non-homestead property taxes make up 40% of the education budget. And then another 35% roughly comes from other sources. For example, every penny of sales tax goes there and nowhere else. We spend over $2.5 billion a year in Vermont on in the education fund. 30% of that roughly comes from federal funds, and as we've said earlier with housing, that's very volatile. To depend on a third of our budget to come from the feds is not very sustainable. So we have 52 supervisory unions or districts, 119 school districts, and over 285 public schools in Vermont. Very expensive. It's going to be because of our rural nature. We're going to have some really small schools in some really remote areas. That's just the way it is. But we're not to scale in other areas of the state. And people who will say that Act 60 didn't work, we already consolidated, it didn't work. Well, we didn't. Some places did. A lot of places did not. And some it's only in name only. Where I taught, we had 6 elementary schools that had their own school districts and 1 regional high school. We changed that to 1 school district for all of the elementary schools, 1 for the high school, and changed nothing else. So it changed in name, but nothing else. So I'm not surprised there was no savings or changes in any way. The places that did really consolidate under Act 60 did save millions of dollars, and they spent it. They didn't save it because our current funding system gives you no incentive to save money. It's like for every dollar you spend, it's like getting 2. So the original H454 put forth by the governor within a day was basically scrapped completely and became a strike all amendment. So what came out of the House bore almost no resemblance to the original plan, which is why I was a no vote as it came out. Then it went to the Senate. A lot of changes were made, and then it was reverted almost back entirely to what we had passed out. So the Committee of Conference report, I was a yes vote then. I didn't like everything in it, but it had enough in it to move the process forward. So there's really 3 parts, I would say, to the current Act 173 education legislation. Quality. We don't even have common graduation requirements across the state. To graduate from Danville High School versus Burlington versus Rutland versus North Country, it's not consistent statewide, and we're a very small state. So there's a group working on that. Another part is governance. That's what the task force is working on. Do we need 52 governing units for 80,000 students? Probably not. We're not to scale. So the task force is working at that level, not at the school level, at supervisory unions, school districts. And then there's the funding, which is a big piece. The foundation formula that's been proposed, a lot of people think that's some unheard of, strange thing. There's only 2 states in this country that don't use some version of a foundation formula, Wisconsin and Vermont. Every other state uses some form of it. So there are some, we heard a lot as I've gone to public hearings, that we should just fix health care. If we fix healthcare costs, then education won't be so expensive. Well, our demographics make that difficult. We're an aging state. You know, about 2/3 of Vermonters are on Medicare, Medicaid, or both. That's not a moral judgment. That's just the math. You know, so for every 1 person paying commercial insurance rates, they're basically paying for 3 people, just because of the demographics in this state. So unless that changes to have a lot of young working families paying health insurance, that's something you can't just fix overnight. So some have said we should just switch and pay with income tax instead of with property tax. Well, we pay for other things with income tax. If we add $2.5 billion of spending onto what we need to raise with income tax, that's going to be tricky. Virtually every state in this country uses property tax and income tax to fund education because it's a more stable, consistent, predictable revenue stream than income tax. So I'm on the House Education Committee, which is made up of 11 members, 4 of which are Republican, 7 of which are Democrats. I would say 2/3 of those members were on the committee last year. 4 or 5 of us are new to the committee this year. 5 are retired or current teachers. We have school board members, so a lot of knowledge in the room. And we have had lots of bills proposed to us. We're trying to focus on this for the most part. And what came out of the final legislation was this school redistricting task force, which is tasked with looking at the governing structure, not the school level, the superintendent's school district level. So we were tasked with proposing no more than 3 map proposals to the legislature by December 1st. The task force is not a decision-making body. We are issuing a report. It is the legislature that will have to decide this. The legislature regulates municipalities in Vermont, and school districts are municipalities. So we have 3 proposals kind of in the works now. One is based on where comprehensive high schools should be across the state. That would involve some construction dollars for sure. We don't have a map really to go with that yet, but we have a meeting on Monday. Another one is about boards of cooperative education overseeing things. Again, a lot would have to happen underneath those 5 units. Otherwise, you're just adding another layer of administration on top of what's already there. Again, more to come on Monday. The third proposal that's currently on the table is building your current governing units. I'm going to call them governing units because it's another whole issue, around where career and technical centers are located across the state. My committee in the House looked at that proposal in January. There are about 14 or 15, depending on how you divide them up. Pretty equally distributed around the state. Manchester has a little bit of a hole there that would have to be dealt with. It's not perfect. Again, Monday of this week in Waterbury, we'll be looking at these maps that have been adjusted and voting at that point to decide which one or ones of these will go in the report to go to the legislature due on December 1st. At least one of these proposals, assuming there's more than one, has to include the idea of supervisory unions as well as supervisory districts. That's been a real sticking point. I know in the rural area where I live, supervisory union structure is very important to us because we tuition. We have to tuition. We don't operate K through 12 systems. In all of Essex County, there is one high school, and that's Canaan on the Canadian border. Where I live in Linden, we don't have a public high school. There isn't one. We go to Linden Institute, St. Johnsbury Academy. We don't have K-12 systems. So having supervisory union structure certainly in a lot of places in the state has been something I have supported all along. Those who don't like tuitioning, those who don't like choice, don't like supervisory unions. They prefer supervisory districts. So that's kind of where we're at. That was a really quick overview, only half hour, and I assume people will probably have some questions in the last 10 minutes or so that we have. Back of the room was the first hand I saw. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Ended up being about 110 million to buy down the rate to about 1%. Yeah. Yeah. No. No. Mm-hmm. It's an excellent question. For me, it is really about scale. We are not at scale. And there are some places in this state that are going to have to remain small and remote. I'll keep pointing to Canaan High School. It's the only game in town. There are other areas of this state that's not the case, where there are, I'll give an example where I taught. They still are maintaining 6 elementary schools that are all half empty. And they're still maintaining those buildings. They're maintaining staff. They can't even hire staff. After I left, they've gone through 3 math teachers since I left. They can't even staff the buildings with teachers, so everyone's on remote licenses. We just can't afford to continue to operate this many governing structures and the pay they're getting. And supervisory unions, for example, they're not taxing authorities. They're paying leases on their buildings in a lot of cases. It's really got to be about consolidation. And yes, it's not very popular. What I've heard a lot going around the state is, yes, we want you to change everything, but don't change what I have. Change everybody else, but don't change what I have. And it's going to have to come to a point where people are going to have to say, okay, what's good for the entire state? What works? It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. What works in Montpelier is not going to work in Canaan, I'll use Canaan again. What works in Essex County and Grand Isle County is going to be completely different than what's going to have to happen in Chittenden County. So there has to be some flexibility there. But, you know, for 84,000 students to operate 285 schools, 119 school districts, and 52 supervisory unions is not a very efficient use of dollars that we don't have.
Can I chime in just real fast a second? And that is that in the great state of Florida, 27 million people that are there, there are 56 school districts. So you're looking at 119 here in the state of Vermont with 500,000 people, and in a 27 million person state has 56. So thinking about the cost that it requires to maintain that structure is significant to the state, which is why you're looking at 11,000 versus 24,000 per student, to just give you an idea.
Well, and one thing for me isn't all about cost, it's about efficiency. Because if you're not using your time efficiently, then, you know, if a superintendent, for example, and where I has 2 school districts to deal with, 2 budgets, 2 board meetings, 2 of everything in a month, as opposed to the district or supervisory union north of me has 15 different school districts in it. That means that superintendent is going to 15 board meetings a month, dealing with 15 budgets. They're spending all their time on that paperwork and not being an educational leader to their principals. So it's an inefficient system, which costs you time on tasks as well. Yes.
Vermont is very unique as far as how we, there's a lot of local control.
Yes.
And that's been really difficult to convince people to change the model.
Right.
Because they lose
Definitely.
control. How are you planning to kind of message to the public that, yes, it's going to save money, but there's just this real
There is. There is. So I'll say 2 things on that. That's one of the reasons I'm not opposed to supervisory unions as opposed to supervisory districts. I'm not sure a supervisory district is less money than a supervisory union if it's an efficient supervisory union. One thing that was in the original governor's proposal that was tossed out that I'd like to have come back, which I've stated on the record, was that every school had an advisory board with spending authority. And for me, in my life, what local control means to a lot of people is their school. It's not, I really care about the entire supervisory union, I care about my kids in my school. The playground, the sports teams, what's happening within these walls. And if every school had that board, it's more than a booster club, because they also have some spending authority and say, here's what's happening at my school. Here's what we care about at our school. We care about getting new playground equipment. I don't care what's going on 5 schools away from here. I care about my kids. I would like to amend that legislation to put that back in about every school having their own board, advisory board. You know, what local control do you have to vote no on your budget? But you can't really line item it. I had a former superintendent came in and testified before our committee with the new foundation formula and wrote a mock budget for a supervisory union with 50 schools in it. He said, I had more control. I had more choices with this funding model than I had in the old one. And I had money left over. I had more than enough. And we could make those choices about this school needs a guidance counselor. That's what we're going to fund. Oh, this school, we really care about our music program. That's what we're funding here. So in some senses, he felt he had more local control with the foundation formula than he did in the existing funding model. But yeah, having a local board, because it's really your local school you care about the most. And again, it's really about having local elementary schools, more centralized middle schools, and more regional high schools. So we have 1 minute. I was told I can talk to you any day, so I'm going to call him this guy. Yes. Yes. Yep.
And nobody commented, nobody attended the meeting who wasn't an educator.
Yes.
Nobody commented except for an educator.
Yes.
And I had to get off at 8 o'clock
Yep.
at the end of the thing. And nobody who wasn't an educator commented.
Right.
And yet still my town is taxed $42,000 per student.
Yep.
Just like the richest counties in America. We're South Carolina. And we spend 24,000 a student, which is a good number.
Yep.
But where do we rank? We rank dead average in the country
Mm-hmm.
in terms of results and outcomes. And I don't think that has to do with the rural nature. So I wanted to bring that up.
Right, and I would agree. I've been to public hearings all across the state, and the vast majority of those who stand up and speak anyway, who come to the microphone, are school employees. And we are getting a lot of other input that aren't people standing at the mic, and maybe it's just the comfort level with doing that. Maybe it's that people feel their voice isn't going to matter. That's, so I'm getting a lot of emails. We're getting a lot of written public comment. There are organizations that are trying, like the Rural Schools Community Alliance is really kind of like trying to funnel that. But yes, a lot of people who are employed by schools. And I would say the same thing. In the House Education Committee, the people that are in the room every single day, and of course that's their job, are the Vermont Superintendents Association, the Vermont Principals Association, the NEA. That's who's there. Yeah. I think we're out of time though, but I'll visit.
Yeah,
We'll
we
visit
could
offline.
stay here for a few minutes.
We'll
but we
visit.
definitely
But there's
have to
another,
try.
there's another group coming in to talk about affordability. So, thank you. Let's see how I'm quoted on Vermont This Week next week.